We're glad to also bring to your attention now Jerry Reist. He needs no introduction. He's coming in response to questions that you have raised around General Conference. And so he will speak about that for as long as he can. So let's see what happens.
I said I have to be warned when it's time for me to stop because you gave me a lot of questions. Let me begin with the report on the group process. What the facilitation group would report to General Conference if this were General Conference and we had gone through this process. The first thing we would report is one of the groups did not return their form. So we will recognize immediately that the information we have is incomplete. The second thing that we will observe is that there is no support for change at this time. There were roughly, I'm saying roughly because I don't know what was on the unreturned form. There were 13 people who thought we should change the numbers, 170 people who thought we shouldn't change the numbers, and 49 people who were undecided. And what was most significant as we looked at those results were the number of questions for clarification. And there were numerous questions for clarification. If we were to actually be doing this as a petition at General Conference, the recommendation that would come from the facilitation group is that this be referred for research to the General Counsel on Finance and Administration to bring back to us some financial information implications, and it would probably be recommended to be referred to COSRO and GCOR to help, and to the Division on Ministry with Young People to help us do analysis of the ways in which it affects equity in representation. And that would be essentially the report that would come to the body, because that was the information that came on the sheets. So you see, there's no predetermined outcome. It's the information that's actually provided on the sheets. Now, I will tell you that there are a lot of other comments, but I don't want to take the time to go through all of that on this mock session because I'd like to take the time to answer some of the other questions that you raised. So let me first of all clarify something. Even though there is a PDF form of the DCA, and even the ADCA, and even though the ADCA is also going to be published in EPUB format, you will be sent, if you were a delegate or a first reserve, a physical printed copy of the ADCA. That's one of the questions that was asked. One of the other questions that's asked is, are you really giving tablets to all the delegates to General Conference? The answer is no, we are not. We are doing a test run with delegates from the central conferences. We are not providing tablets to everyone. We are providing tablets to delegates from the central conferences as a test of the system to see if it will work. And it has some benefits for us using it with central conference delegates in terms of communication processes and other functions. But these are the actions of the Commission in terms of distribution of tablets. One of the questions you had about the process is, were the considerations given to language differences? Well, there are considerations for language differences in two ways. One, the small groups will not be one language group for the most part, although there will probably be some groups that are one language. Part of the desire is to mix people from different cultures and backgrounds in the small group process, but we also have a limitation of the number of interpreters we have available, and so we have to structure our groups in such a way to make sure that we have adequate interpretation services available for each group. What could it be used for other than human sexuality? Well, let me be clear that it could be used for anything. But because of the nature of General Conference, where we have This time 1,044, I think that was what you said, Gary, petitions. Obviously, there's not enough time to use this process for every issue. So it's intended to be used for issues that require the attention, not just for whatever comes along. The primary purpose is to help build community as we address issues and concerns. And that is what we would hope would be accomplished. How will the varied conversations around each table be brought together in a fair and just way? That is what we delegate to the facilitation group. The reports that you give, if the scribes have properly recorded your conversations, you've signed off on them, the facilitation group is then responsible for processing that. And the question of how fairly they do that is really going to be something you, as delegates, will decide when you receive their report. Clarify the timeline for facilitators to discern and report their results. Well, the two occasions that we're going to use this with legislation, if it's adopted, will be on Saturday morning and early afternoon. The conclusion of that time, we gather up all the reports, they go to the facilitation group, and the facilitation group will work on them on Sunday with a deadline to have it done, to turn it into the publisher for printing in the Monday morning DCA so that it can be considered in the Tuesday session of the plenary. That's the ideal and optimum flow of information. It has to be, those of you who are familiar with the rules will recognize it has to be printed on Monday, be available for 24 hours before we can consider anything on Tuesday or any point in the week. Question, will there be a vote to accept or revise or reject the facilitator's report? There will be an opportunity to accept, revise, or reject the facilitation report. If we were to have gone through the process with what I just brought back, the chair would have opened the floor for discussion, and somebody could have said, well, I move that we do this right now. And we would then decide whether we were acting on it or not. Obviously, when it's a result like this one, where people clearly were not ready to deal with making an action, if that's the decision or that's what's reported from the groups, that's how the facilitation group will report. But if the facilitation report or the facilitation group gets clear information for a direction, then that's what the facilitation group will report. Let me say to you that I am a member, if the rule is adopted, the Secretary of the General Conference is a member of the group in an advisory and supportive fashion. That is only because I've seen the process firsthand and will be working with them to help get the results out, not to influence the result. But this is a new process for us, and it's going to take some time before we all feel comfortable with it. What process exists to challenge the report? Can plenary bring back the whole package of petitions, or a subset of 6 facilitators say no action is necessary? Friends, the delegates to General Conference have this tool that's called suspension of the rules. And you can move to suspend the rules and process-wise do just about anything you want to. So the answer is, if you suspend the rules and bring back the petitions, then you can do that. But it will be up to the body to decide if you want to do that. It's not up to the facilitation group. Will the facilitation group be equal lay and clergy? That depends on who you elect. How do we practice conferencing at General Conference? Are there places, ways to get to know people with whom we are expected to conference? Conferencing is to be practiced. When do we practice at General Conference? Before we have to take up big, hard topics. Well, frankly, it's my hope that annual conferences will begin to use this process and explore it so that people will get some practice. I don't think there's going to be much practice before this general conference. I hope that the rule gets adopted and it gets carried back to experiment with it, to learn it, to be able to apply it. But for nearly 150 years, General Conference lasted for a month. And there were opportunities for people to practice things. In 1939, the 900 delegates to the Uniting Conference made the commitment that we have followed ever since, that we were now so much smarter than our ancestors, that we could handle the business in 10 days. And we've basically followed that pattern ever since 1939. But literally, from the Christmas conference on, General Conference was a month long. And so there were lots of opportunities for relationship building and for practicing things. We do not have that luxury. Now, I've got to say that some of the things that were on the notes, I'm not sure what they meant as questions. One of them was convey, understand versus convince. Well, my response to that is an anonymous statement. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And nobody's going to convince anybody of anything in the process. It's going to be more a matter of, can we hear one another in the process? How is the leadership prepared to deal with the uncertainty? Well, I'm sorry, I can't get my page to scroll down. How is the leadership prepared to deal with the anxiety of not reaching completion? I don't know. You know, we made a decision back in the 90s that we were not going to insist that everything be voted on, and we followed that since then. We get through the business we get through. And there's always ambiguity at the end of General Conference, even if we voted on it. Remember, some of you have been here long enough, you know, we used to vote on things at the close of General Conference by referring them to somebody, as if that brought closure to it. And of course it didn't. How can the process also honor the participants' deeply held positions as well? Well, I hope that in the small group process, we honor one another's deeply held positions, and we share them with one another. But there's a flip side to that, and that is a concern that we will not have enough time in our small group community building to trust each other enough that we can state our positions, and a request of whether or not we can do secret balloting. Well, if we're doing secret balloting, we're really not even following the process of being honest and open with each other. So I don't know. You can amend the rules that way, and you can say that's what we want to do. But I've got to tell you, I hope we can have enough compassion and understanding for each other that we can be open and honest. I recognize that that is extremely difficult in many instances. There are power imbalances. There are status imbalances. And yet, I don't know how we move forward if we don't discipline ourselves to recognize those imbalances and listen to each other. I think if we feel that we have to keep things locked under cover, then we really create a kind of hypocrisy among ourselves. On the other hand, we are going to have secret balloting in legislative committees because we'll be using electronic devices, so nobody will have to raise their hand to be seen. So, you know, we make our compromises in how we process. I'm going to interject something here that is not from the commission in any way and not part of the rules, but it's a personal contribution to make to you. There's a sermon by John Wesley. It's sermon number 38. A Caution Against Bigotry. I would urge all of you to read it. We claim to be Wesleyan. Unfortunately, we're so Wesleyan that we don't bother to read Wesley. I would really urge you to read that sermon and let it inform your hearts as we come to General Conference. I think you might be surprised at how easily you will be convicted of sin in that sermon. I know how it convicts me of sin. How are the 99 petitions distributed? Does everyone get all 99, or are they distributed? Well, actually, the 99 petitions are already listed in the ADCA. They're there. You've got them. You can review them. But the questions you'll get will not be a simple, you're voting on this one of the 99, and this one of the 99, and this one of the 99. There'll be questions to help us gather from you your responses so we can try to discern, so the facilitation group can try to discern where there is support, where there is not support, what the movement of the Spirit is in the body. I know that sounds kind of vague to people, but can you imagine how we would ever use this process and have everybody consider 99 separate petitions? It can't be done. But we can hopefully surface our feelings, our convictions, our sense of where the Spirit is leading us. And remember, whatever the facilitation group does, it comes back to the body. Question the criteria. Well, I asked Gary about the criteria that he used because Gary was gracious enough to be the one who did the work of pulling out the 99. Let me be clear with you. The 99 petitions are not petitions about human sexuality. They are petitions about LGBTQ issues, people, and their situations. That's what's in the 99. There are a lot of other petitions about other aspects of human sexuality that are not in the 99. Could there be trained leaders to make themselves available to have Christian conferencing for reserved delegates and others? Bring us the volunteers, we'll train them. But I don't have time to recruit them. And I'm sorry, folks, but that's just part of the reality of timing. We also have limitations of space. But we would certainly invite visitors who wanted to assemble in small groups to practice to do that and help share and carry the process back to help broaden the process's experience in their home conferences. In the process, some things that people apparently we were not completely clear in communicating with you about. I'm going to repeat this a couple times so you can hear it clearly, I hope. Monitors are not chosen from among the delegates. No delegate will be a monitor. Monitors are not chosen from among the delegates. No delegate will be a monitor. The group leaders will be delegates. The facilitation group will be delegates. Monitors will not be delegates. Okay, I want to make that clear because that was one of the questions. There is a concern that having 15 people in a group could be too large a group to have any meaningful conversation. Frankly, I share that concern. I don't know what other solutions we have for addressing a body the size of General Conference. By the way, we did have a sheet of rationale for reducing the numbers, and it didn't get distributed. And part of the reason you didn't get it was because it was too full of my personal opinions. We also had a couple of comments about reframing our guidelines for conversation in regarding accepting apologies. I will take that back to some parties to discuss that in further depth. So you're not getting a response just from me, but we get a chance to look at that in more depth. There was a comment that anybody who's not part of the planning process doesn't have any ownership in it. You have delegated the planning process to General Conference, to the Commission. The Commission invited people from a variety of perspectives to participate in discussions. I am sorry that we cannot include 13 million United Methodists in a conversation that enables us to come out with a result that gets us to General Conference happening on schedule. I don't mean to be flip about that. I'm serious. I wish there was a way to do it. We did our best to include as many voices in the process as we could. We certainly did not achieve perfection, but we did struggle to do that. There's a concern that we don't have enough time to prepare all 864 delegates well. That's probably true, which means that your communication with your colleague delegates will be very essential to what we do and what happens at General Conference. We need each other in order to do this work. None of us can do it alone. So if it's going to work because you help each other understand it and you carry it back to your delegations and you approach it from a point of view that this is just one of the tools at General Conference that we want to use to see if we can find better ways to hear and respond to God's direction for our church in the world at this time. I want to thank you for your patience with me and the time that you have given to us. We learned a lot about the form, which we would not have learned without having a run-through. And there will be some redesign elements in the form before you see it at General Conference. So you have a little bit more clarity that when you say concur, you're talking about that support for the petition. And non-concurrence is not support for the petition. And the numbers really do need to be counted and some things like that you know, sometimes when we're doing things, if I know what the answer is, I assume everybody else knows. There's a technical term for that. I forget what it is, but it's the fallacy. It has something to do with the fallacy of shared knowledge, the assumption that we all share knowledge that we don't all share. So you taught us a lot, and I want to thank you for that and for the opportunity that you gave us to work through this process this time. If you have questions that you did not get to ask, that were not on the sheet, please let me know, and we will try to get back to you with those answers. Thank you.